Regina Wright sat in seat 2A, staring at the empty tray table in front of her. Around her, every white passenger in first class enjoyed perfectly plated steak and lobster. The flight attendant had just told her they were out of meals for her seat. Regina smiled coldly and pulled out her phone. In a few hours, this entire crew would be unemployed. What they didn't know was that Regina Wright was the CEO of this airline. And this wasn't the first time she'd endured racial discrimination on a plane her own company operated. Before we dive into what happened next, drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. If you believe accountability matters, hit that like button right now. And subscribe because this story is about to show you what real justice looks like. Now, let's go back to where this all began. Regina Wright had never expected her life to take her this high. At 38 years old, she was the CEO of Atlantic Wings Airlines, one of the fastest-growing private carriers in America. But her journey to the top had been anything but smooth. Born and raised on the south side of Chicago, Regina grew up watching her mother, Dorothy, scrub floors at O'Hare International Airport. Her father had died when she was 7, leaving her mother to raise 3 children alone on a custodian's salary. Regina still remembered standing in the terminal as a little girl, watching planes take off through the massive windows, dreaming of a life beyond the poverty that surrounded her family. Her mother would finish her shift exhausted, her hands raw from chemicals, but she always told Regina the same thing. "Baby, you're gonna fly one day. Not clean these planes like me, but fly them. You're gonna be somebody." Those words became Regina's fuel. She studied relentlessly, earning a full scholarship to MIT where she double-majored in aeronautical engineering and business administration. While her classmates came from wealthy families with connections, Regina worked 2 campus jobs and spent summers interning at airlines for free just to get experience. After graduation, she entered the aviation industry at the ground level, literally. She started as a gate agent, then worked her way up to operations manager, then regional director. 15 years of grinding, of proving herself twice as hard because she was a black woman in a white male-dominated industry. 3 years ago, when Atlantic Wings was on the verge of bankruptcy, Regina saw an opportunity. With backing from an investment fund that believed in her vision, she bought the struggling airline and began the painful process of rebuilding it from the ground up. She had turned the company profitable within 18 months, expanding routes and improving service ratings. But Regina had always maintained one principle that set her apart from other CEOs. She refused to lose touch with reality. At least once a month, she would book flights under her regular name without disclosing her position, experiencing the service as an ordinary passenger. She believed you couldn't fix what you didn't see. And today, flying from New York to Los Angeles for an important aviation conference, she was about to see something that would change everything. She had deliberately booked her ticket as Regina Wright, no title, no special notation in the system. Just another first-class passenger. Or so she thought. The morning at JFK Airport was chaotic as usual. Crowds surged through security checkpoints, announcements echoed across terminals, and the smell of overpriced coffee drifted from every corner. Regina wore a tailored black blazer, her hair pulled back in a neat bun, carrying a leather briefcase that spoke of professionalism. When she approached the check-in counter, the agent's eyes flickered with surprise. The woman glanced at Regina's first-class ticket, then at her ID, then back again. She called over a supervisor who examined the documents with unnecessary scrutiny. Regina felt the familiar weight of assumption, the unspoken question hanging in the air. How does she afford this? Is this ticket legitimate? She smiled politely, thanked them, and proceeded to the gate. In the first-class lounge, she noticed the stares. White passengers glanced at her, their eyes traveling from her face to her seat location, clearly wondering if she belonged. Regina opened her laptop and began reviewing quarterly reports, but her mind was already cataloging these microaggressions, these tiny cuts that black travelers endured every single day. Regina boarded flight AW237 with quiet confidence, her boarding pass clearly showing seat 2A. As she stepped into the first-class cabin, the lead flight attendant, a blonde woman in her mid-40s with sharp features and cold eyes, looked up from her clipboard. Her name tag read Bethany Morrison. Bethany's gaze traveled slowly from Regina's face down to her ticket, lingering with obvious skepticism. "Let me see that again," Bethany said, reaching for the boarding pass. Regina handed it over, maintaining her composure. Bethany examined it 3 times, turning it over as if searching for evidence of fraud. "Are you sure this is your seat? Economy is in the back." Regina's jaw tightened slightly, but her voice remained calm. "I'm certain. Seat 2A, first class." Bethany reluctantly handed the ticket back, her lips pressed into a thin line of displeasure. Meanwhile, the white passenger directly behind Regina, a man in his 50s wearing an expensive suit, received a completely different welcome. "Good morning, Mr. Whitmore. So wonderful to have you flying with us today." Bethany's entire demeanor transformed, her smile bright and genuine. The contrast was stark and deliberate. Regina settled into her seat, placing her briefcase in the overhead compartment. Beside her, an older white man named Charles sat reading the Wall Street Journal. He glanced at Regina, and she saw his eyebrows furrow slightly. He leaned toward his wife Patricia across the aisle and whispered, though not quietly enough. "First class isn't what it used to be. They'll let anyone up here now." Patricia nodded in agreement, shooting Regina a disapproving look. Regina pretended not to hear, opening a magazine instead. But she was memorizing everything. Every look, every word, every gesture. This was research now, painful research. A few rows back, another black passenger, a man in his early 40s wearing business casual attire, had also been seated in first class. His name was Raymond Foster, an engineer traveling to a conference. Regina noticed that when Raymond asked for a blanket, the flight attendant named Jennifer Cole told him they were all out, yet minutes later delivered blankets to 3 white passengers in rows behind him. As the plane prepared for takeoff, Regina closed her eyes and thought about why she had bought this airline in the first place. She remembered her mother cleaning these very cabins, invisible to the passengers who looked right through her. Regina had promised herself that when she had power, she would create a company where everyone was treated with dignity. But clearly, that message hadn't reached everyone. The plane lifted into the sky, climbing through clouds toward cruising altitude. Regina opened her laptop and began typing notes, documenting timestamps and names. She thought about confronting the situation immediately but decided against it. Better to let it play out, to gather irrefutable evidence. Better to see just how deep this problem ran. And deep it was, she was about to discover. About an hour into the flight, the cabin filled with the rich aroma of grilled steak and butter-poached lobster. Regina's stomach growled quietly. She had skipped breakfast for an early morning meeting and was looking forward to the first-class meal service. The flight attendants rolled the cart down the aisle, and Regina watched as Bethany personally served each white passenger with practiced grace. "Good afternoon, sir. Today we're offering prime Angus beef with roasted vegetables or Maine lobster tail with lemon butter. Which would you prefer?" Each passenger received the full presentation, complete with linen napkins, silver cutlery, and a selection of premium wines. The service was impeccable, attentive, exactly what first class promised. Regina felt a small flutter of pride. This was the standard she had worked hard to establish across Atlantic wings. Then Bethany reached her row. The lead flight attendant stopped beside Regina's seat, and her expression shifted. The warmth vanished, replaced by barely concealed irritation. "We've run out of meals for your seat," Bethany stated flatly, no apology in her tone. Regina blinked, certain she had misheard. "I'm sorry, what?" Bethany repeated herself with exaggerated patience, as if speaking to a child. "We don't have a meal available for you." The galley count was off. Regina glanced at the service cart, which still had several covered plates visible. "But I can see meals right there on the cart." Bethany's jaw tightened. Those are backup meals reserved for other passengers. If you'd like, you can order a sandwich from the economy menu. We can heat one up for you. The absurdity of the situation hit Regina like a physical blow. She had paid over $2,000 for this first-class ticket, and she was being offered an economy sandwich while every white passenger around her enjoyed gourmet meals. Regina kept her voice level, though anger burned beneath the surface. Why would my seat specifically not have a meal? Everyone else has been served. Bethany crossed her arms defensively. That's our galley procedure. Sometimes seats get skipped in the count. If you're not satisfied, you're welcome to file a complaint after we land. Charles Whitmore, the businessman beside Regina, turned and inserted himself into the conversation. Is there a problem here? You're disrupting everyone's meal. His wife Patricia added from across the aisle, some people don't understand airplane etiquette. They think paying for a ticket means they can make demands. Regina felt heat rising in her chest, but she maintained her composure. I'm simply asking to receive the service I paid for. That's not unreasonable. Bethany leaned down, her voice dropping to a threatening whisper. Ma'am, if you continue to cause a disturbance, I will have no choice but to notify the captain. Disruptive behavior on an aircraft is a federal offense. The entire first-class cabin had gone silent. Every passenger was watching. Regina glanced back and saw Raymond Foster, the other black passenger, shaking his head. He hadn't been served either. 2 black passengers, both skipped. Every white passenger, served in full. The pattern was undeniable. Raymond stood up from row 5, his voice firm. Excuse me, but I also wasn't offered a meal. This is clearly discrimination. Bethany whirled on him. Sir, please sit down immediately. You're creating a safety hazard by standing during service. Raymond pointed at the white passengers who had stood earlier without issue. They stood and you said nothing. Jennifer Cole, the younger flight attendant, appeared beside Bethany. She whispered to her colleague, but loud enough that Regina heard every word. I told you we shouldn't let these people in first class. They always cause problems. Regina felt something snap inside her. She reached for her phone, opening the Notes app to document everything. Bethany's hand shot out, snatching the phone from Regina's grasp. Recording on aircraft is prohibited. I'm confiscating this until we land. Regina's voice turned ice cold. You have no legal right to take my personal property. I wasn't recording anything. Bethany held the phone out of reach. I have full authority to secure any item I deem a threat to flight safety. You'll get this back at the gate. Regina stared at Bethany Morrison's name tag, memorizing it. She looked at Jennifer Cole's name tag. She noted every detail of their faces, their attitudes, their actions. Then she sat back in her seat and said quietly, I'll remember this. All of it. Bethany smirked, clearly thinking she had won. I'm sure you will, honey. She pushed the cart forward, leaving Regina with an empty tray table while the smell of steak and lobster filled the cabin around her. Regina sat in that seat, hungry and humiliated, while passengers whispered and stared. But beneath her calm exterior, she was planning. Planning something these flight attendants would never forget. The tension in the cabin was suffocating. Regina sat motionless, her empty tray table a glaring symbol of the discrimination she had just endured. Around her, white passengers cut into their steaks, sipped wine, and pretended not to notice what had happened. Some looked uncomfortable but said nothing. Others, like Charles and Patricia, seemed satisfied that the disturbance had been handled. But not everyone stayed silent. From row 3, a young white man with sandy hair and intelligent eyes stood up. His name was Dylan Brooks, a 24-year-old law student at UCLA. Dylan had watched the entire exchange with growing anger, and he couldn't stay quiet anymore. Excuse me, Dylan said loudly, addressing Bethany as she prepared to move the cart toward the galley. I witnessed what just happened, and I want to state clearly that this was blatant racial discrimination. I'm a law student, and I'm prepared to testify as a witness if necessary. Bethany turned slowly, her expression hardening. Sir, this doesn't concern you. Please sit down. Dylan didn't back down. It concerns every person on this plane who believes in basic human rights. You denied service to the only 2 black passengers in first class while serving everyone else. That's a violation of the Civil Rights Act. Charles Whitmore scoffed loudly. Oh, here we go. Another millennial looking for his 15 minutes of social justice fame. Kid, you don't know what you're talking about. Patricia chimed in with a condescending smile. They probably just ran out of meals. It happens. These 2 are just trying to get free flights by crying racism. Dylan's face flushed with anger. No, ma'am. I watched the flight attendants load that cart. There were plenty of meals. They deliberately skipped these passengers. Another voice joined the growing confrontation. Dorothy Kim, a 50-year-old Korean-American businesswoman sitting in row 4, stood up as well. I saw it too. This young man is right. The flight attendants made eye contact with both black passengers and chose not to serve them. I'll also testify if needed. Bethany's composure cracked slightly. Her voice rose, sharp and defensive. If any of you continue to interfere with crew operations, we will be forced to divert this flight. Is that what you want? To delay everyone because of your assumptions? Regina finally spoke, her voice cutting through the chaos with quiet authority. No one wants that. I'll handle this matter appropriately after we land. Everyone please sit down. But Bethany wasn't finished. She pointed at Regina with barely controlled rage. You know what? I've been doing this job for 22 years. I know troublemakers when I see them. People like you buy a first-class ticket thinking it makes you equal to everyone else, but you still don't belong here. You still don't fit. The cabin went deathly silent. Even Charles and Patricia looked shocked at Bethany's naked hostility. Jennifer Cole, who had been standing near the galley, nodded in agreement with her colleague. Bethany's right. Some people just need to know their place. Regina felt every eye in the cabin on her. She could see the mix of emotions. Shock, disgust, discomfort, and in some faces, agreement with Bethany's words. This was the moment where Regina could have exploded, could have screamed, could have demanded immediate action. But she didn't. Instead, she looked directly at Bethany and said calmly, "Thank you for making your position so clear. I appreciate your honesty." Bethany seemed confused by Regina's composure, but she took it as submission. Good. Then we understand each other. She turned away dismissively. As the flight attendants moved the cart toward the back, a third crew member approached Regina quietly. His name was Michael Torres, a 32-year-old flight attendant of Latino descent who had been working the rear galley. He carried a sealed sandwich container and a bottle of water. He leaned down and whispered, "Ma'am, I'm so sorry about what happened. This isn't right. Here, please take this." Regina looked up at Michael and saw genuine remorse in his eyes. She accepted the sandwich with a small nod. "Thank you. You didn't have to do that." Michael glanced nervously toward where Bethany and Jennifer stood talking. "I know. But someone had to." He hesitated, then added even more quietly, "I know who you are, Ms. Wright. I looked up our passenger manifest during boarding. I'm sorry this happened on your own airline." Regina's eyes widened slightly, but she recovered quickly. She touched Michael's hand briefly. "Remember this moment, Michael. Remember what you saw today. And thank you for your kindness." Raymond Foster, still seated in row 5, caught Regina's eye. He gave her a small nod of solidarity, the unspoken understanding between two black people who had just experienced the same humiliation. They didn't need words. The experience bound them together. Regina pulled out a small notebook from her briefcase and began writing everything down by hand since her phone had been confiscated. Every name, every quote, every detail. Dylan Brooks quietly took a photo of his meal and the empty space at Regina's seat, documenting the evidence. Dorothy Kim did the same. These witnesses would matter. Regina looked out the window at the clouds below, thinking about her mother. Dorothy Wright had cleaned planes for 30 years and had probably endured countless instances of disrespect and invisibility. She had never had the power to fight back. But Regina did. And she was about to use every ounce of that power. Now I want to ask you something. Do you think Regina should have spoken up more in that moment, or was staying calm the right move? Comment, number 1, if you believe she handled it perfectly, or tell us what you would have done differently. And if you're angry about what just happened, hit that like button and subscribe because you need to see what Regina does next. So what do you think happens when they finally land? Will Regina let this slide, or is she about to turn this entire situation upside down? Let's find out. The remaining 4 hours of the flight felt endless. Regina sat in her seat, the sandwich from Michael half-eaten on her tray table. She had filled 6 pages in her notebook with observations, quotes, and witness names. Around her, first-class passengers finished their meals, watched movies, and dozed off. Some avoided eye contact with Regina entirely, clearly uncomfortable with what they had witnessed but unwilling to confront it. Others, like Charles and Patricia, seemed to have forgotten the incident entirely, laughing over cocktails. But Regina hadn't forgotten. With every passing minute, her resolve hardened. This wasn't just about one bad flight or one prejudiced crew member. This was about a culture that had allowed such behavior to flourish unchecked. As the plane began its descent into Los Angeles, Regina felt the familiar pressure change in her ears and something else. The anticipation of action, of justice, of accountability. The aircraft touched down smoothly on the runway at LAX, and passengers immediately reached for their phones and overhead luggage. Regina remained seated, watching. Bethany Morrison appeared in the aisle, holding Regina's confiscated phone. She approached with the same condescending expression she had worn throughout the flight. "Here's your phone back. Try to control yourself on future flights." She dropped the device onto Regina's tray table without care. Regina picked up her phone, checked that it was undamaged, and looked up at Bethany with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Thank you, Bethany. I'll definitely remember your service today." Bethany's lips curled into a smug smile. "I'm sure you will, honey. Have a nice day." She turned and walked away, already dismissing Regina from her mind. That was her first mistake. As passengers filed off the plane, several people approached Regina. Dylan Brooks handed her his business card. "My name is Dylan Brooks. I'm a third-year law student at UCLA. If you decide to pursue legal action, please contact me. I'll testify for free. What happened today was wrong." Regina accepted the card gratefully. "Thank you, Dylan. Your courage means more than you know." Dorothy Kim stopped next, scribbling her phone number on a piece of paper. "I run my own consulting firm, and I travel constantly. I've seen discrimination on flights before, but never this blatant. Please, let me know how I can help. We have to fight this." Regina squeezed Dorothy's hand. "I will. Thank you for speaking up." Raymond Foster was the last to approach. He shook Regina's hand firmly. "I hope you sue them for everything they're worth. People like us, we deal with this all the time, but we're usually alone. Today felt different because you were there. Good luck." Regina felt emotion tighten her throat. "Thank you, Raymond. This isn't over." The moment Regina stepped into the terminal, she pulled out her phone and dialed. Her executive assistant, Amanda Pierce, answered on the first ring. Regina. How was your flight? Regina's voice was tight with controlled anger. Amanda, I need you to schedule an emergency meeting with the entire executive leadership team and human resources. Today. Right now. Amanda's tone shifted immediately. What happened? Regina walked quickly through the terminal, her heels clicking on the polished floor. I just experienced firsthand the kind of racist treatment that our black passengers have been reporting. And it happened on my own airline. I want everyone in a conference room within 2 hours. Amanda didn't hesitate. I'll make it happen. Anything else? Regina thought for a moment. Yes. Pull the security camera footage from flight AW237 today. Every angle, every moment. And get me the complete personnel files for the entire crew, especially the lead flight attendant, Bethany Morrison. Her next call was to Lawrence Mitchell, the Director of Human Resources. Lawrence was a meticulous man in his 50s who had helped Regina rebuild the company's workforce. Lawrence, I need you to compile a report on all discrimination complaints filed in the last 6 months. I want to see every case, how they were handled, and what the outcomes were. Lawrence hesitated. Regina, that's a lot of sensitive information. May I ask why? Regina's voice hardened. Because I think we've been burying problems instead of solving them. I need the truth, all of it, within 90 minutes. Lawrence promised to deliver. Regina's third call went to Victoria Chen, the company's chief legal officer. Victoria was sharp, uncompromising, and one of the best aviation lawyers in the country. Victoria, I need you to review the legal grounds for terminating employees based on discrimination. What's our liability, what's our protection, and what's the cleanest way to remove toxic personnel immediately? Victoria, ever the professional, asked no questions. I'll have a memo ready before your meeting. Regina ended the calls and hailed a taxi to her hotel. She checked in quickly, barely noticing the luxury suite Atlantic Wings had booked for her. She went straight to her laptop, pulling up the company database. She found Bethany Morrison's file and began reading. Bethany had been with Atlantic Wings for 12 years, transferred from the previous ownership. Her performance reviews were mediocre, noting that she was adequate and follows procedures. But buried in her file were 3 formal complaints from passengers over the past 2 years. All 3 complained about rude service. All 3 complainants were people of color. Each complaint had been resolved with a small flight credit and a generic apology letter. No disciplinary action had been taken. Bethany had never been suspended, never been retrained, never been held accountable. Regina's anger transformed into something colder and more focused. Determination. She pulled up Jennifer Cole's file next. Jennifer was younger, only 5 years with the company, but she had 2 similar complaints. Same pattern, same inaction. Regina checked the time. She had 45 minutes before the meeting. She opened her email and typed a message to the entire executive team with the subject line, Emergency Meeting, Systemic Racism in Atlantic Wings. The email was brief. Today I personally experienced racial discrimination on one of our flights. This is unacceptable and ends now. Be prepared to discuss immediate action and long-term reform. No excuses. No delays. She hit send and stood up, changing into a fresh business suit. She looked at herself in the mirror, seeing not just a CEO but a black woman who had been made to feel small in a space she literally owned. That feeling would fuel everything that came next. At exactly 4 o'clock that afternoon, Regina walked into the conference room at Atlantic Wings' Los Angeles office. The space was modern and bright, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the airport runways. Seated around the table were 8 executives. Franklin Hayes, the chief operating officer, a capable white man in his 60s who had decades of airline experience. Lawrence Mitchell from Human Resources. Victoria Chen from Legal. Patricia Wong, the director of customer service, a sharp Asian American woman who managed all passenger-facing operations. Several other department heads filled the remaining seats. Everyone looked nervous. Regina's emergency emails were rare and always meant something serious had happened. Regina didn't bother with pleasantries. She took her seat at the head of the table, opened her laptop, and projected an image onto the large screen. It was a still frame from the cabin security camera showing Bethany Morrison serving a white passenger a full meal while Regina's empty tray table was visible in the foreground. "This," Regina said quietly, "is from my flight this morning. I was denied service in first class because I'm black." The room erupted in shocked murmurs. Franklin leaned forward, his face pale. "Regina, what? That's impossible." Regina's eyes flashed. "Watch." She played the security footage. The silent video showed everything. Bethany's careful service to white passengers. Her abrupt refusal to serve Regina. The confrontation. Jennifer Cole's supportive stance beside Bethany. The entire crew's complicity through inaction. When Raymond Foster stood up to object, his treatment was equally dismissive. The video was damning, undeniable, and available from multiple camera angles. When the footage ended, the conference room sat in stunned silence. Patricia Wong had tears in her eyes. Lawrence Mitchell looked physically ill. Victoria Chen's expression was unreadable, but her pen moved rapidly across her legal pad. Regina let the silence stretch before speaking again. "Now let me show you something else." She pulled up a spreadsheet. "These are discrimination complaints filed against Atlantic Wings in the past 6 months. 15 total. 12 involved passengers of color reporting poor treatment in first or business class. Of those 12, 10 specifically mentioned being denied food service, blanket service, or beverage service that white passengers received. Every single one of these complaints was resolved with a small voucher and a form letter. Not one resulted in crew discipline." She let that sink in. "We paid people to go away instead of fixing the problem. We chose to protect racist employees over our customers." Franklin found his voice, though it shook slightly. "Regina, I had no idea the pattern was this clear. I thought these were isolated incidents." Regina's gaze was withering. "That's the problem, Franklin. You thought. You didn't investigate. You didn't dig deeper. You accepted the easiest explanation because it was comfortable." Lawrence spoke up, his voice defensive. "We did conduct interviews after each complaint. The crew members always said it was a mistake, a galley error, a misunderstanding." Regina slammed her hand on the table, making everyone jump. "A misunderstanding? Lawrence, I sat on that plane and listened to Bethany Morrison tell me that people like me don't belong in first class. Is that a misunderstanding?" Lawrence had no answer. Victoria interjected calmly. "From a legal perspective, we have clear grounds for immediate termination based on the video evidence alone. The verbal statements make it even stronger. If we act decisively, we minimize liability." Patricia Wong raised her hand hesitantly. "What exactly are you proposing, Regina?" Regina's response was immediate and unwavering. "I'm proposing that we terminate every crew member from that flight who either participated in or witnessed discrimination and did nothing. That includes Bethany Morrison, Jennifer Cole, and 2 others who stood by silently." Franklin's eyes widened. "You want to fire 4 people at once? Regina, that's an entire crew. We'll have operational difficulties." Regina leaned forward, her voice low and dangerous. "So you're more worried about operational difficulties than about the fact that we employed people who humiliate our customers based on skin color? Is that what you're telling me right now?" Franklin backtracked quickly. "No, of course not. I'm just thinking about the logistics." Regina softened slightly. "Franklin, I understand logistics. But here's what I know. If we don't take decisive action right now, we're sending a message that racism is tolerable as long as it doesn't cause too much fuss. I refuse to send that message. She clicked to the next slide, which outlined a comprehensive plan. Here's what we're going to do. 1. Immediate termination of the crew members responsible, with full documentation of cause. 2. A company-wide audit of all discrimination complaints from the past 3 years to identify any other problematic patterns or personnel. 3. Mandatory diversity and inclusion training for every single employee, 40 hours annually, with consequences for non-completion. 4. Creation of an independent complaint review board with authority to investigate and recommend disciplinary action. 5. A public apology and commitment to change, issued directly from me. The room absorbed this. Patricia spoke carefully. That's aggressive, Regina. Some people will say you're overreacting, that you're implementing cancel culture. Regina's laugh was bitter. Cancel culture? Patricia, I was denied food on a plane I own because of my skin color. This isn't about canceling anyone. This is about accountability. If someone can't treat human beings with basic respect, they don't belong in a service industry. Victoria added her support. I think this plan is legally sound and ethically necessary. We should move forward. Lawrence nodded slowly. I'll prepare the termination paperwork. But Regina, I have to ask. Do you want to do this quietly or publicly? Regina didn't hesitate. I want to meet with them personally. I want them to know exactly why they're being fired and who's doing it. And I want a clear message sent to every employee in this company. Franklin looked worried. That's risky. It could get emotional. Regina stood up, gathering her materials. Good. It should be emotional. Racism is emotional. Humiliation is emotional. Justice is emotional. Schedule the meeting for tomorrow morning. I want those crew members in a room, and I'll handle it personally. She looked around the table at each executive. And one more thing. If any of you can't support this plan, if you think it's too harsh or too risky, tell me now. Because I need a leadership team that shares my values. No one spoke. Everyone nodded their agreement. The next morning at 10 o'clock, Bethany Morrison, Jennifer Cole, and 2 other flight attendants from the previous day's crew sat in a windowless conference room at Atlantic Wing's headquarters. They had been called in for what Human Resources described as an urgent personnel matter. None of them looked particularly worried. Bethany scrolled through her phone, occasionally chuckling at something. Jennifer chatted with one of the other attendants about weekend plans. They had no idea their careers were about to end. The door opened, and their casual attitudes evaporated instantly. Regina Wright walked in, followed by Lawrence Mitchell and a stern-looking woman they recognized as the company's attorney. Bethany's face went through several expressions in rapid succession. Confusion, recognition, and then pure horror as she realized who was standing before her. You, Bethany breathed, half rising from her chair. You're the passenger from yesterday. Regina took her seat at the head of the table, placing a leather folder in front of her with deliberate care. Not exactly. I'm Regina Wright, Chief Executive Officer and majority owner of Atlantic Wings Airlines. The airline you work for. Or rather, worked for. The color drained from Bethany's face. Jennifer looked like she might be sick. The other 2 attendants glanced at each other in panic, clearly trying to piece together what was happening. Regina opened the folder and pulled out several printed screenshots. Let me refresh your memory about yesterday's flight, in case any details have slipped your mind. She slid the first image across the table. It showed Bethany serving a white passenger with a warm smile. This is you providing excellent service to Mr. Charles Whitmore in seat 3C. She slid another image. This is you telling me, the black woman in seat 2A, that there were no meals available for my seat. Another image. This is you physically taking my phone from my hand. Bethany tried to interrupt, her voice shaking. Ms. Wright, please, I didn't know who you were. It was a mistake. Regina held up one hand, silencing her. I'm not finished. She played the audio recording from the cabin security system, which captured Bethany's voice clearly. People like you buy a first-class ticket thinking it makes you equal to everyone else, but you still don't belong here. You still don't fit. The words hung in the air like toxic smoke. Jennifer started crying silently. Regina's voice was ice. Does that sound like a mistake to you, Bethany? Because to me, it sounds like a clear expression of your racist beliefs. Bethany attempted to defend herself, desperation creeping into her tone. I was stressed, it was a long flight, I didn't mean it that way. Regina leaned forward, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Then how did you mean it? Explain to me how telling a black woman she doesn't belong in first class can be interpreted as anything other than racism. Silence. Bethany had no answer. Lawrence Mitchell opened his own folder and began distributing termination letters. Ms. Morrison, Ms. Cole, and all crew members present, you are hereby terminated from Atlantic Wings Airlines effective immediately for gross misconduct, violation of our non-discrimination policy, and behavior unbecoming of company representatives. Jennifer sobbed openly now. Please, Ms. Wright, I have 2 kids. I need this job. I'm so sorry, I'll never do anything like that again. Regina felt a flicker of something, not quite sympathy but recognition of human desperation. But she didn't waver. Jennifer, do you know how many black passengers have sat in my airline seats over the years and been treated the way you treated me? Do you know how many of them had kids to feed, bills to pay, dignity to maintain? You didn't care about them. You saw their skin color and decided they were less than. Bethany, realizing there was no escape, turned angry. You can't do this. We have rights. I'll sue you for wrongful termination. Victoria Chen, the attorney, spoke for the first time. Her voice was professional and utterly devoid of sympathy. Ms. Morrison, you're welcome to pursue legal action. However, we have video evidence, audio recordings, witness statements from multiple passengers, and a documented history of previous complaints against you. You signed an employment contract that explicitly prohibits discriminatory behavior. You will not win. She slid business cards across the table. You have 24 hours to remove your personal belongings from your lockers. Your final paychecks will include compensation for unused vacation time but no severance. Security will escort you from the building today. The other 2 attendants, who had remained silent throughout, finally spoke up. One of them, an older woman named Sandra, said quietly, I didn't say anything racist. I just didn't get involved. Regina turned to her. That's the problem, Sandra. You witnessed discrimination and chose silence. In doing so, you condoned it. At Atlantic Wings, we don't accept bystanders to racism. You had a responsibility to speak up, to protect our passengers, and you failed. The 4 former employees sat in stunned silence as the reality settled over them. Their careers in aviation were likely over. Airlines talked to each other. Word would spread. Bethany tried one last time, her voice breaking. I've worked in this industry for 22 years. Regina stood up, signaling the meeting's end. Then you had 22 years to learn how to treat people with respect. You chose not to. This meeting is over. As security guards appeared to escort the terminated employees out, Regina called out one last thing. Bethany, Jennifer, all of you. I hope you learn from this. I genuinely do. Because the world is changing, and people who can't treat others with basic human dignity will find fewer and fewer places to hide. The door closed behind them. Regina remained standing at the head of the conference room for a moment, feeling the weight of what she had just done. It wasn't satisfaction exactly. It was the heavy burden of justice. Lawrence approached her carefully. That was difficult to watch. Regina nodded. But necessary. Now let's make sure this never happens again. Within 48 hours, the story exploded across social media. Dylan Brooks, the law student who had witnessed everything, wrote a detailed Twitter thread describing the incident and praising Regina's decisive action. The thread went viral immediately, accumulating over 200,000 retweets and sparking the hashtag AtlanticWings accountability. News outlets picked up the story. National publications ran headlines like CEO fires crew after personally experiencing racism, and airline executive takes stand against discrimination in her own company. Regina's phone rang constantly with interview requests. She accepted a handful, carefully choosing outlets that would let her tell the complete story without sensationalizing it. On CNN, she sat across from a sympathetic host and explained her reasoning. This wasn't about revenge. It was about values. I built AtlanticWings on the principle that every person deserves respect. When I discovered that principle was being violated systematically, I had two choices. Look the other way or take action. Looking away would have made me complicit. The response was overwhelmingly positive, but not universally so. Some critics accused Regina of implementing cancel culture and destroying lives over a single incident. A few op-eds questioned whether firing the entire crew was proportional to the offense. Conservative commentators suggested she was overreacting for publicity. Regina addressed these criticisms head-on during a press conference. To those who think I overreacted, I would ask you to imagine sitting in a seat you paid for, being denied service because of your race, and being told you don't belong. Would you call that a minor incident? Would you accept an apology and move on? Or would you demand that the people responsible face consequences? She paused, letting the question sink in. This wasn't one bad day. This was a pattern. And patterns require systemic solutions, not slaps on the wrist. Raymond Foster, the other black passenger from the flight, posted a video that garnered millions of views. In it, he described his experience and praised Regina's courage. For years, black travelers have shared stories about discrimination on planes. We've been told we're overreacting, misunderstanding, making it up. Regina Wright proved that we're not. She proved that these things really happen, and more importantly, she proved that someone in power can choose to do something about it. The video ended with Raymond's eyes glistening with emotion. Thank you, Ms. Wright, for seeing us. For believing us. For acting. Regina watched the video in her office and felt tears prick her own eyes. This was why it mattered. Not just the policy changes or the firings, but the message that black passengers' dignity was worth protecting. Dorothy Kim, the Korean-American witness, wrote an article for a major business publication titled, Why Everyone Should Care About What Happened on AtlanticWings. In it, she argued that discrimination against any group threatens everyone's humanity. I'm not black, but I spoke up because injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. What Regina Wright did took courage. What she's building now, a truly inclusive airline, takes even more. AtlanticWings saw an immediate surge in bookings, particularly from travelers of color who felt, perhaps for the first time, that an airline actually valued them. Revenue increased 25% in the month following the incident. Regina used the profits to fund new initiatives. She established the Wings of Opportunity Scholarship Program, offering full funding for black students pursuing degrees in aviation, engineering, and business. The first year's commitment was $10 million. She completely overhauled the training program, bringing in diversity consultants and requiring every employee from baggage handlers to executives to complete 40 hours of inclusion training annually. More importantly, she created real consequences. A new policy stated clearly that any employee found guilty of discrimination would be terminated immediately, no exceptions. She formed an independent review board with the power to investigate complaints and recommend action, removing that authority from managers who might be biased or conflict-averse. Regina personally met with every passenger who had filed a discrimination complaint in the past 3 years. She apologized face-to-face, offered full refunds plus additional compensation, and most importantly, listened to their stories. One elderly black man named George Henderson told her through tears, "I'm 73 years old. I've been flying since the 60s when they wouldn't even let us sit in certain sections. I thought things had gotten better, but then I had an experience like yours last year. No one believed me. The airline sent me a $50 voucher like that would fix everything. Thank you for believing us." Other airlines began following Atlantic Wings' example, either out of genuine commitment or fear of similar scandals. Within 6 months, 3 major carriers announced new anti-discrimination policies and training programs, explicitly citing Regina's leadership as inspiration. The industry was changing, slowly but undeniably. Regina appeared on magazine covers. Fortune named her CEO of the Year. Time included her in their list of most influential people. But the recognition that meant most to her came from a handwritten letter delivered to her office. It was from Michael Torres, the flight attendant who had given her a sandwich when everyone else turned away. "Dear Ms. Wright," the letter began, "thank you for making me proud to work for Atlantic Wings again. I've been ashamed of this industry at times, ashamed of things I've seen and been too afraid to report. Your courage gave me courage. I recently reported another employee for making racist jokes in the crew lounge. He was disciplined. A year ago, nothing would have happened. You changed that. Thank you." 6 months after the incident, Regina stood at a podium in a hotel ballroom filled with 500 people. She was accepting the National Association of Black Business Owners CEO of the Year award, a recognition that felt both humbling and validating. As she looked out at the sea of faces, many of them black professionals who had fought similar battles in their own industries, she felt the weight of representation. She was speaking not just for herself but for everyone who had ever been made to feel less than. "When people ask me why I handled the situation the way I did," Regina began, "why I chose public confrontation instead of quiet resolution, I tell them this story. When I was 7 years old, my mother took me to O'Hare Airport. She was working a double shift cleaning planes, and she had nowhere to leave me, so I came along. I sat in the terminal and watched people board flights to places I couldn't even imagine. Paris, Tokyo, Sydney. And I asked my mama why we never got to fly. She said, 'Baby, those planes aren't for people like us.' I didn't understand what she meant then. But I do now." Regina's voice grew stronger, more passionate. She meant that poverty had clipped our wings. That racism had built walls around our dreams. That the world had decided our place, and it wasn't 35,000 feet in the air in a first-class seat. But my mama was wrong about one thing. She thought those planes would never be for us. She couldn't imagine a future where her daughter would own the planes, would run the airline, would have the power to make sure everyone could fly with dignity." The audience erupted in applause. Regina waited for it to subside. "That's why I did what I did. Not just for me, but for my mother who cleaned those planes. For every black traveler who's been treated as less than. For every person of color who's been told they don't belong. I wanted to send a message that times have changed, that some of us now have power, and we will use that power to protect the people who come after us." She paused, taking a breath. "But this isn't just my story. It's our collective story. After Atlantic Wings made our policy changes, I received thousands of emails from people sharing their experiences. A black doctor who was asked if she was sitting in the right section. A Latino businessman who was ignored while white passengers were served around him. An Asian family whose children were mocked by flight attendants. These stories poured in, and every single one broke my heart because they showed me that what happened to me wasn't unique. It was typical." Regina's eyes swept the room. "So yes, I fired those employees. And I would do it again. Because we cannot build a just future by tolerating injustice. We cannot create change by being polite to people who disrespect us. Sometimes, justice requires confrontation. Sometimes, progress requires disruption. And sometimes, doing the right thing means making people uncomfortable. The audience rose in a standing ovation. Regina felt tears threatening but held them back. She continued when the room quieted. I want to tell you what's happened since that day. Atlantic Wings is thriving. Our customer satisfaction is at an all-time high. We've hired over 200 new employees, and our workforce now reflects the diversity of America. We've become the preferred airline for many travelers of color who finally feel safe and respected when they fly with us. Our revenue has increased, our reputation has improved, and our employees tell me they're proud to wear the Atlantic Wings uniform. She smiled. So to everyone who said I was making a mistake, that I was being too harsh, that I was driving my company into the ground, I have two words. We're soaring. After the speech, Regina mingled with attendees. She met CEOs, entrepreneurs, and activists, all wanting to share their own stories or thank her for her stand. One young black woman, a college student named Jasmine, approached nervously. Ms. Wright, I'm studying aviation management because of you. I never thought someone who looked like me could run an airline. You showed me it was possible. Regina hugged Jasmine tightly. You can do anything. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Later that evening, back in her hotel room, Regina received an unexpected email. It was from Bethany Morrison, the flight attendant she had fired. The subject line read, I need to say this. Regina hesitated before opening it, unsure what to expect. The email was surprisingly vulnerable. Ms. Wright, I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even know if I deserve it. But I need you to know that losing my job was the wake-up call I needed. I've spent the last 6 months in therapy, really examining my biases and where they came from. I grew up in a racist household, and I never questioned those beliefs until they cost me everything. I'm not asking for my job back. I know that's not possible. But I want you to know that I'm trying to be better. I volunteer now with an anti-racism organization. I'm learning. I'm changing. Thank you for holding me accountable, even though it was painful. Regina read the email twice. She didn't respond immediately. She needed to think about what, if anything, she wanted to say. The next morning, she typed a reply. Bethany, I appreciate your honesty. Accountability is painful, but it's necessary for growth. I hope your journey toward understanding continues. That's all any of us can do, continue growing, continue learning, continue becoming better versions of ourselves. I wish you well. She hit send and felt a strange sense of peace. This wasn't about punishment for punishment's sake. It was about creating a world where actions had consequences and where people could choose to become better. A week later, Regina boarded an Atlantic Wings flight from Los Angeles to New York. She sat in first class, seat 2A, the same seat where it all began. This time, the experience was completely different. The lead flight attendant, a young black woman named Jasmine Clark, not the college student, but someone else with the same name, greeted her warmly. Good morning, Ms. Wright. It's an honor to have you flying with us today. Can I get you anything before we take off? Regina smiled genuinely. Thank you, Jasmine. I'm fine for now. As the plane prepared for departure, Regina looked around the first-class cabin. The passengers were diverse, black, white, Asian, Latino. The crew was equally diverse. Everyone was being treated with the same respect and attention. This was what she had fought for. Not special treatment for anyone, but equal treatment for everyone. As the plane lifted into the air, Regina opened her laptop and began drafting a memo to her executive team. The subject line read, Next Steps, Expanding Our Equity Initiative. There was still work to do, always more work to do. But for the first time in a long time, Regina felt truly hopeful. She looked out the window at the clouds below and thought about her mother. Dorothy Wright had passed away 2 years earlier, before Atlantic Wing's transformation. But Regina felt her presence anyway, felt her pride. "We're flying, Mama," Regina whispered. "We're finally flying." The plane leveled off at cruising altitude. Jasmine returned with the meal service. "Ms. Wright, today we're offering herb-crusted salmon or grass-fed filet mignon. Which would you prefer?" Regina smiled. "The salmon sounds perfect." Jasmine served the meal with care, placing the elegant plate before Regina with genuine warmth. As Regina took her first bite, she thought about how far she had come from that day 6 months ago. From sitting humiliated with an empty tray to now, eating a meal served with respect on her own airline. But more than that, she thought about all the passengers who would never have to experience what she experienced. The children of color who would board planes and feel welcome. The black businesspeople who could fly first class without being questioned. The families who would travel without fear of discrimination. That was her legacy. Not the awards or the headlines or the increased revenue. Her legacy was dignity. Her legacy was change. Her legacy was proving that one person, with courage and power and conviction, could make a difference. And as the plane carried her across the country, Regina knew that her mother had been wrong all those years ago. The planes weren't just for some people. They were for everyone. And she would spend the rest of her career making sure they stayed that way. So what do you think about Regina's journey? Do you believe she was right to take such strong action, or should she have handled it differently? Drop a comment and let me know your thoughts. If this story moved you, if it made you think about accountability and justice, hit that like button right now. And if you want to see more stories about people standing up for what's right, subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications. Share this video with someone who needs to hear this message today. Thank you for watching, for listening, and for believing that change is possible. Remember, every act of courage, no matter how small, creates ripples that can become waves. Keep flying high, and never let anyone tell you that you don't belong. Until next time. Regina Wright's story teaches us that true leadership means standing up for principles even when it's uncomfortable. When she experienced racism firsthand on her own airline, she could have quietly resolved it behind closed doors. Instead, she chose accountability, transparency, and systemic change. The most powerful lesson here is that silence enables injustice. The flight attendants who stood by and said nothing were just as guilty as those who actively discriminated. In our own lives, whether at work, school, or in public spaces, we all have a responsibility to speak up when we witness unfairness. Regina also showed us that power isn't just about having authority, it's about using that authority to protect the vulnerable and create lasting change. Her decision to fire the crew wasn't about revenge but about sending a clear message that discrimination has real consequences. She didn't stop at punishment either. She rebuilt the system with new training, accountability measures, and a commitment to diversity. This reminds us that fixing problems requires more than removing bad actors. It requires changing the culture that allowed those actors to thrive. Finally, Regina proved that doing the right thing can also be good business. Atlantic Wings didn't suffer from her bold actions, it flourished. Sometimes the moral choice and the smart choice are the same thing. What would you have done in Regina's position? Would you have fired the entire crew, or would you have chosen a different approach? Drop your honest thoughts in the comments below. If you believe accountability matters more than comfort, smash that like button right now. And if you want to see more stories about courage, justice, and people who refuse to accept discrimination, hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that change is possible, that standing up matters, and that one person with conviction can transform an entire system. Thank you for watching, for engaging, and for being part of a community that believes in dignity for all. Remember, every time you speak up against injustice, you're creating the world we all deserve to live in. Keep fighting the good fight, keep demanding better, and never let anyone make you feel like you don't belong. Until next time, stay strong and keep your head high.